Thank you, Jerry, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's show on AM 1320 and streaming live at WFHR.com. We also welcome our friends from Wisconsin Rapids Community Media. The reason why, Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink is here for his monthly visit, and we'll be taking your phone calls as well during the show at 715-424-2600. With that, we welcome the Mayor of the City of Wisconsin Rapids, Zach Vruwink. Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, Carl, and good morning to our listeners.
Had the folks from the Boys and Girls Club and Y on the show yesterday, and one of the things they talked about, they're looking at the groundbreaking ceremony in the middle of August. That has to get you pretty excited as the mayor of our fair city.
It is, and it's probably near the 40th anniversary of the opening of the Rapids Mall, so it's an exciting time to obviously look back on what was and what was such an important part of the community fabric and the community lives of people that lived in our area with the Rapids Mall, and obviously now to look to the future, which is just as exciting and as important. And I think last week when we celebrated we had the State Economic Development Corporation folks in town, where we formally received a proclamation from the governor, as well as $150,000 to the city, and the city then in turn granted that to the Boys and Girls Club, to the YMCA for some of the demolition and environmental work that needs to occur on the property. So it's all around very exciting.
Okay, I asked them about their role and their interaction with you, and since you're here, I might as well, as this project proceeds, what will be the role of the city going forward?
Well, we've done most of the pre-approval processes. We did agree to develop put together a developer's agreement. That developer's agreement has not fully been fleshed out yet because there's still some ongoing concerns related to parking needs that they've now identified as they've gone through the process with the VA clinic. Their parking had gone from needing about 50 spaces to 75, now 100 spaces. So that creates, and the struggle or the challenge is most of their facility has been designed. They're still working through, I believe, some components to it, but in large part, the site plan and all of their components are established. So it creates a little bit of a constraint for the Centralia Center parking lot, as they want now 50 some spaces from the city to incorporate into the project, and so we're working through components with that, and then there's still some other issues related to dedication of right-of-way for public improvements that may happen at some point in the future, which are just kind of semantics that projects all have to go through.
I asked them, and they said this was something that the city would be determining, as well, the traffic pattern that will be there. Will we see a different type of traffic pattern with this facility as compared to what we had with the Rapids Mall?
I believe we're maintaining the main entrance points, the traffic pattern flow. They're depending on the development of those outlots, particularly the restaurant and the gas station car wash outlot, which has an access point off of Hale Street. That could be closed if there were a developer that came forward that wanted to use the entire site and not have to provide access through the site. So that could change, but Hale Street remains a entry point to the Centralia Center parking lot, as well as the expressway and the both expressway, Jackson and Grand Avenue entrances will all remain to that property.
And then how will the new senior housing project, that tower, how will that fit into that development?
Sure. So last night the City Council did approve the agreement formally with the developer for what's being called Arbor Terrace, which is the senior housing project in the Centralia Center parking lot. We've gone through a number of iterations of design for the parking lot to accommodate as many parking spots as we can. So now we've come up with a parking count of 115 spaces in the Centralia Center parking lot with the senior housing project. There will be 40 parking spaces beneath the building and then some alongside the building. So in terms of how this is all going to play together, we believe we've got a design now that's very workable for all parties involved. The challenge will be how much can the city accommodate the VA or the YMCA's demands or desires for additional parking. So we put together a number of proposals and put them in front of the YMCA. The challenge is, again, how do we accomplish everyone else's needs on city property when, in fact, developers in general, in most cases, developers have to accomplish that on their own.
Okay. Eventually, we'll have this all come together, and you'll have an interesting development there. You'll have the Boys and Girls Club, Y, senior housing, the Centralia Center, and the amenities in there, including a Lowell Center and the like. What will that do in terms of our downtown? In your view, what does it say about Wisconsin Rapids?
Well, there's a couple ways to look at it, one of which is the near term. If you take into account the senior housing project, we'll have a couple dozen contractors working for the entire duration of the construction cycle. And then you look at the YMCA project, which, I mean, their construction estimates or quantity from a workforce standpoint is pretty strong. I mean, they'll have a lot of contractors, well over 100, I believe, contractors, maybe closer to 200 over the course of that entire project. So there will be demand, renewed demand for services, entertainment, food, that type of thing in the downtown area during the construction cycle. And then you look beyond that, it's really hard to, I think, come to the realization that, that this is going to be a new hub of activity in many forms for the downtown area. And so it's very exciting. Obviously, there will be, with any change, there's always consequences or adverse reactions, and one of which is parking. When the river block was reoccupied after being largely unoccupied for a long time, many of the proprietors who had grown accustomed to how the activity levels were before felt pain that there was going to be more people parking and kind of a push and a pull there. And while the conversations were contentious at times, it was all around a positive that we have a parking problem, and that's a great thing to have again in the downtown area. So by the time you layer on a $26 million YMCA investment and all the construction activity, as well as about a $4 million senior housing project, not to mention all the other projects that are happening in the downtown area or even across the city, those in the hospitality industry, whether they're in the hotel, food and beverage business, they're happy. They're seeing a bump not only from Sand Valley, but they're seeing a bump. They will see a bump, continued and ongoing bump in construction activity.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something I've been bringing up on this program, is that with all of the different construction projects going on, you look at what's going on at the hospital. The Tribune project will soon be putting, looks like it, with their successful effort to get onto a crowdfunding site. They're very confident that they're going to be doing something soon. Triangle project. You look at all these different things. The trail, where there's a lot of construction workers in town right now, and they are eating at restaurants. They're shopping. They're renting or staying at motels and hotels. I mean, it's a busy time of the year just with that.
Yeah, you take a drive past the Cobblestone Inn, which is the former American Inn, on any given night, and the parking lot is full of construction vehicles. And the Hotel Mead obviously has some of that too. The Sleep Inn, as I understand, will be reopening very, very soon after they did a full remodel of that property. So, we've got our hotels are going to be happy. The challenge will be, do we have enough? If we, for example, if we were to get a private construction activity, a major new investment of a business, are we going to be able to house those contractors in the community in addition to all of those that are already planned, that are known, that we know that are going to happen?
Do we need another hotel, a hotel or motel on the west side of near the downtown?
Well, we had, as part of the Rapids Mall study, looked at, in the retail study really, looked at the hotel component. And while we've got a good quantity of rooms, just like our housing situation, we don't have a great number of quality hotels. So we've got 3 or 4 A and B class properties, and there's some in the C and D class. So we really need to look at the occupancy of those top tier hotels, and then that's where you would understand or determine whether or not the market can bear another property. Anecdotally, we're almost at that tipping point, that if there was a significant amount of tourism activity or some other dynamic, that there may be a need for another property in the city.
I was talking to Rick Bacoca and I have talked about this, and I've talked to some other folks, that what's going on in Sand Valley and what's going on in Wisconsin Rapids, maybe a middle point for a new hotel development would be what was the Clancy driving range. And I've heard heard other people talk about that.
Sure, yeah.
Have you heard anything? No.
I haven't. I've had folks come to me with different ideas for that property.
Okay.
Sure, I mean, from the drive-in movie theater to, and it's not in the city, right? So
Right.
the city doesn't have a role to promote too much of the development there.
Okay, let's talk about something that came up last night at the council meeting. Alderperson Coates wanted to renew the motion, I should say, to approve a rezoning of that parcel, southeast corner of 17th Avenue North in Rosecrans. What happened?
So as part of parliamentary procedure, if a rezoning or any other motion fails to get enough votes to pass, the formality is the alderperson has to bring a request to renew it. And essentially the council then has to vote whether or not they want to reconsider that item or to renew that motion. And you have to get a simple majority of votes. Well, Alderperson Kubishak was absent last night, so we had 7 members present. And unfortunately for Alderperson Coates' effort, he was 1 vote short for bringing that item back to the body for a vote. So the actual vote didn't even get a hearing last night because of the lack of a support for the motion to renew. So the status quo will remain. The property will remain not as multifamily. However, the council did later in the meeting approve the new zoning code and the new zoning map. And what that did is it now classified that property as rural residential. So it's no longer agricultural because of the formal broad map that was approved by the council. So I would say in terms of redevelopment, that property is 1 step closer. Did it get the zoning that Alderperson Coates and others on the council that supported that rezoning? No, but we've got a starting point now to bring development to that property.
Because now it's rural residential.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, versus agriculture, which I think for residents that live near there, I think this is a positive in the sense that they're not going to have a farm development in their neighborhood.
I was, people were saying, well, we need to keep this the same, but you realize you could have a big farm.
That's right.
Going right near. I don't think you'd want that either.
Exactly.
So now we can get something that maybe everybody agrees with. Now, does Wood County still own that property?
They do, right. Because the rezoning failed, there was a contingency in terms of the sale of the property. So we're going to continue to work with. I talked to the county board chairman after the meeting last night, and he's committed, as the county board was, to getting that property back on the tax rolls. And I think it benefits all taxpayers to see some development there and to get it producing for community benefit. It's a couple blocks from Meade School. It's a couple blocks from a number of employers in the area that employ a lot of people, and to have housing there makes sense. And so we're going to continue to pursue development of that property.
What about other housing developments that the city has been working on? Anything new? I know that we've talked about down the road here and everything, everywhere else of it, to try and get good quality housing in the city, new housing.
Well, we continue to hear from site selectors and business prospects that the community doesn't have a strong enough housing market, or not market, I should say, housing supply to meet their needs. So if Wisconsin Rapids is going to grow, if you're going to see the population numbers change on the sign, you have to build new rooftops. And that's in the form of multifamily, as we've continued to do. It's in the form of single family. And so we're going to continue in the form of duplexes. We're going to continue to pursue housing projects across the city because, frankly, we're not going to attract a single new business to this community without doing that. Now, as it relates to 25th and Alton Street, as you just brought up, where the city had put out a request for proposals from developers to put in single-family homes, some of the feedback we got was, one, timing wasn't right for some developers to put in a proposal. Another developer said it was too small, so we're looking at a larger subdivision or a city development in the city that would be more along the lines of 40 units, 40 single-family home units as opposed to 12, I think is what we were thinking, because there were larger lots. So we're looking at other property in the city for that development, or for that developer. And then some have said that it's just, it's not a good fit for them to pursue. So we're going to keep the request open at this point until we get a developer come forward with interest at the 25th and Alton property in particular. The challenge with the multifamily segment is there isn't property that carries the zoning to allow that development to occur. So you get these not in my backyard dynamics with multifamily housing rezoning requests. There is some property on the west side that we're looking at for potentially siting multifamily. The project that was proposed for 17th and Rosecrans, and so I can't comment exactly where that would land at this point, but we continue to pursue. Frankly, for west side residents who've always said we want to see more development on the west side, the only way it's going to occur is if we add to the housing supply on this side of town. And so we're going to continue to pursue that. It's an objective of the city to grow the number of residents. It's an objective of the city to grow the number of rooftops and obviously grow business in the process. And the only way to do that is through housing units.
Speaking of the west side, you got the old Foundry property, and they're out there. Their ancillary location as well. Anything new there in terms of what's going to be happening? Because that's kind of an eyesore right now.
Yeah, well, they continue to pursue a sale of the property. We've had some discussion with them about city and public involvement in that, really the cleanup of that property, because we know until it's cleaned up, you're not going to see a redevelopment happen, right? It's too cost prohibitive for somebody to buy it, clean it, and then return it to reuse or redevelopment. So there are a couple of programs, one of which that the city just received for the benefit of the mall redevelopment. So there are resources that we're looking at potentially applying for that property. We don't have, we haven't done anything formally because, frankly, the property owners haven't been ready to engage at that level, but they've definitely approached us and said, if we can't find a buyer, what options do we have to offload the property, clean up the site for the community's benefit? So we appreciate their willingness to work with the city on that property, but definitely it is an eyesore right now. It's a non-productive site. It's non-functioning on the west side. On their east side, they're still winding down a lot of their operations, and that takes time. So we will work with them, and I think we actually zoned that property in the zoning code for multifamily. So there's a lot of multifamily in that vicinity, so it makes sense for multifamily to occur.
Because I was just thinking, that's why I asked that question. I'm thinking if you're looking for a site potentially for a multifamily development because of the nature of the neighborhood that already exists there, that would be right there. I mean, right on the expressway, right downtown.
Right.
It's
quite a bit smaller than the other parcels we were talking about, but definitely there's some opportunity for redevelopment there.
Our phone lines are open if you have any questions for Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink here on the Morning Magazine. 715-424-2600 is the number to call. Other things that you're concerned about right now. Sometimes I throw this in late, but I'll let you get anything off your chest this morning. That's maybe, because it can get frustrating sometimes, your job.
Well, there was a number of activities on the council last night, actually a lot of business, frankly.
I noticed a lot of, approvals for different events and a lot of that.
Right. Well, we did approve continuing support for the Regional Economic Growth Initiative for Reggie. It was another $20,000 contribution that the City Council decided to fund that organization again. It'll be the fourth year, so that puts the city's contribution totaling a little over $80,000 over the tenure of that organization. So that was another item that council decided to support last night.
Okay. Well, we got our first phone call, and again, 715-424-2600 is the number to call, and you're on to put on that headset, and we'll get this caller on the air. Good morning. You're on the Morning Magazine with Mayor Vruwink.
Good morning. I would like to ask the mayor about, we're talking about the west side, and there's quite a bit of blight over here with a lot of houses that are really, they don't take care of their places. And like on Chase Street, the second house in, it's a big house. And we've called the city on that place for the last 5 years, and nothing really is done about it. And people with all their garbage in their yards, is there some way that the city can address that? Because until that blight on the west side is taken care of, people aren't going to want to buy here or develop here or anything. So I'm really concerned about that. Would you please address that?
Thank you. Thanks for the call, and I think you raise a very valid point that exists. It's concentrated on the west side, and there certainly is pockets of it in existence on the east side of town that I receive correspondence from residents about, that they're very concerned about the look and feel of the neighborhood. And one of the approaches, as you've said, you've called the city, and code enforcement certainly is the most effective way to addressing property maintenance codes, parked vehicles on the front yard, tall grass, to any other concern that people have with the property. The challenge we have with the ordinances, we provide legally, we have to provide them a right to cure, an opportunity to cure it. Now, after the ordinance control officer takes that complaint, potentially issues a citation, which, if anyone wishes to see the reports of the volume of code enforcement violations and activity that occurs every month, I encourage you to request a copy of that report, because it's over a 60-page document of cases around the city that the code enforcement officer is working on, as well as the building inspectors. But the problem is they kick it then to municipal court. So the city prosecutor and the municipal judge then decide the fate of that citation or that activity. And oftentimes, 100% of the time, it's out of the city code enforcement officer's hands at that point. So it's getting the municipal court judge to continue to hold a hard line on some of these cases, especially those that have been chronic in nature. So if you've been working on them for years, I understand your pain. The challenges with the system, I'll call it, is the municipal court then deals with the case. But I also believe that beyond that we can't control, the one area we can control is the integration that our police department has with code enforcement. And there had been a time where the city had integrated its code enforcement activities with the police department. And I do think the time has come again, given the sheer volume of issues and, frankly, the broken window theory, that if you see a broken window, generally there may be other activity involved within the walls of that home. And so I do believe that it's time for an integrated police department code enforcement approach on these issues, because, frankly, I'm tired of seeing them and hearing them and reporting them myself and not getting remedy to them.
Have you talked to the chief? Because that kind of falls under what he did in his previous position in Illinois. It was this type of thing. Have you had a chance to talk to the police?
We've had some discussion, and that's where I'm kind of making this public announcement, really, that we're going to pursue a integrated approach with both community development's code enforcement activities and the police department. I believe, a lot of the times, all the time, the police department is seeing these activities firsthand when they're approaching property, and they have responsibility, I believe, to make the city aware of those violations so we can get remedy. So it doesn't take a resident who's fed up with looking at it after 3 years or 5 years or whatever the time might be and get remedy. And so I think that's something that we're going to be pursuing through the fall. The other piece that I'll mention, and I'll always put a plug in for, is people can report these things. It's always important to get a picture, if you've got a smartphone, to report them. With the city's smartphone app, if you type City of Wisconsin Rapids in your smartphone app store, you can actually download an app and report these issues yourself. And that's so important because it's accountability for the city. When Ray gets a report, the ordinance control officer gets a report, it has a timestamp on it, and that gives him the ability then to follow up with the violation or the violator and then pursue action. But if you call in, and it's great you call in, but I think it's important that we get an actual formal timestamp for everybody's accountability on those issues.
So in essence, we go to the police department, right?
No.
They go to the code enforcement.
You should go to code enforcement. Yeah, that's
go to code enforcement.
But what I'm saying is, there's one code enforcement officer in 6,000 properties, right? So for the code enforcement officer to approach those, now we have 30-some sworn officers that are oftentimes dealing firsthand with neighborhood issues, and I believe they can be our eyes and ears too. So that way, if Ray's not seeing the issue or he isn't able to get to it, that the police department also, who has jurisdiction in these matters, can address them as well. So definitely go to code enforcement first.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for the call.
Thank you. And with that, we have to take our first break. You're listening to The Morning Magazine on AM 1320 and streaming live at WFHR.com. Thanks again, Jerry, and welcome back, everybody, to today's show on AM 1320 and WFHR.com, as well as on Wisconsin Rapids Community Media, which you can view on their website or on your local public access station on your cable system. It's our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. I want to wrap up this section on with housing, and Your Honor, during the break you were talking, a lot of this stuff goes into the issue of rental housing.
It does, and I think if we were to do, we've got the data, and if we were to do an analysis and put maps together and show the public where are the predominant volume of concern and properties that the code enforcement officer spends his time is generally on rental housing. And the other issue that goes along with that is how many of these rental properties are locally owned versus those that are out of town ownership.
And that's always been the problem.
Right.
Some of your biggest problems and violators are owned by someone who lives in Florida or wherever.
That's right, and I think many communities have operated successful rental inspection programs, and it's not about coming through with a laundry list of things that to hit landlords over the head with, but it's about this basic responsibility of safe, quality rental housing that I believe it's the city's obligation to require those that operate a business in the city, in the business of providing rental housing, that it's safe and it has a quality component to it. That these neighborhoods in which people live and pay their taxes to live there shouldn't have to live across the street from a blighted home or a substandard home. It's not fair and it's not right for that to occur. So we're going to be continuing to look at ways the city does have means to continue to raise the bar for these rental housing issues that we've got across the city. And it's not just rental housing, but there's definitely a correlation with the quantity of visits that the code enforcement officer makes and rental housing.
Let's talk about another aspect. And a lot of times people go, well, why did the city tear down this building or that building, and the city had nothing to do with it? Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about some parts of the downtown where there's been buildings torn down, nothing's happened, and I guess a lot of it, Mead-Witter Foundation, has there been discussions? What's going on? People want to know.
Yeah, I think it's sure. People have questions about what people do with their own property, and I know that's a concern. I'd love to tell people what they can do with their property, but I'm in no place to tell them, right? And the city's in no place. But
at the same time, though, you hear, what's the city doing? Well, the city didn't do that.
Right, yeah, and I think, you're specifically maybe referring to West Side, where the Mead-Witter Foundation and others own property, and I think it's fair to question. I think that's everybody's right to say, well, what's going to happen there. I can't speak in great detail to future of property because I don't own it, but I can say the city does have an interest and has expressed an interest in discussing with property owners what they may do with that property, especially as it relates to downtown planning and now the new zoning code and the zoning map. Which really has an economic growth component to it. One of the components of the new zoning code that was approved last night after 24 months or so of discussing and debating and working through the edits of that is that the downtown overlay district, that downtown properties within a certain boundary should have a look and a feel. And so that's obviously an eye or really an aim to promote economic growth and new investment in the downtown. So as we continue to discuss with those property owners that own large tracts of land in the downtown, our conversations are around when are you going to do something? Maybe what's it going to take to get development to occur? Sometimes it's a painful process of demolition and removal of structures that, because they haven't been maintained over the course of their life or have reached an end of life because of their age. Then you've got to tear them down and you've got to start new. And so I think if you're talking specific to the downtown properties, we're going to continue to have conversations and more to share as time goes on. But again, the city doesn't own the properties, and so it's difficult for us to tell anybody what to do with it.
Yeah, but at the same time, sir, can't we say, oh, listen, yes, it's your property, we understand that, but if you're going to tear something down, make sure you clean up the site and make it at least look neat.
That's right.
As neat as possible.
Yeah. That's definitely and I think it's a code obligation that they have if they're going to do any demolition, that there has to be certain standards met that any property owner would have to meet to make sure the site's not unsightly.
Since we're talking about the new code, the zoning code, and everything else that was worked on, give us some of the other highlights. So how has it been changed, and how will it affect the average citizen?
Well, I'll say this: the zoning code we had operated under from the 80s hadn't been substantially changed over the course of that time. And we know the world's changed a lot, development practices have changed a lot, building methods and means have changed. So as of August 1st or the 3rd or somewhere right around there, the city will no longer, city will be operating under a completely new zoning code. So if people were to make changes to their property that would require a review or compliance with the zoning code, it'll affect everybody. And now there won't be dramatic changes unless you do things different. You know, if you make an investment in your property, that you'll have new standards to meet. I won't say they're higher or lower. They're new. They're a lot easier to understand. They're a lot more user friendly, but both for developers and for people that are doing it kind of on their own. And that was our aim, was to create a zoning code that was understood, that was much more relevant and modern than our previous code. For example, there were not building methods referenced in the old code that exists today, and just kind of practices and community character standards. So we believe the new zoning code will now make it easier for people to develop in the city. It'll be less gray area. It's more black and white. Here's what you can do, here's what you can't, here's what we require of you. One of the main areas is landscaping, that most communities have strong landscaping requirements. Now, we didn't go to the extreme and tell everybody they're going to have to do a tremendous amount of landscaping. We said if we're going to have a community that has great character and a nice look and feel, that we need to have some standards for, in this case, landscaping. So you'll see that. We also brought in some other kind of newer, trendier development practices called cottage housing or tiny homes. We've provided for how the city will deal with those types of development proposals. But overall, I mean, this is a binder of code that is completely new and has been completely redrafted for the benefit of development in the city.
Now, how will it affect, for instance, Pam and I are getting ready to do some a remodeling project on our house. We got a contractor picked out and everything else. How will that affect someone who's either going to be putting a new roof, new siding, or do they, as a different process? Have the contractors all been informed about the changes? That's a practical aspect.
Sure. Yeah, we held a number of open houses that we invited. We reached out specifically to groups like the Home Builders Group and others to let them know that this is coming for their comment and review of the code. And some of them weighed in, certainly, and there were changes that were made even up to the 11th hour last night on the code. And there will be modifications and revisions to the code as we go forward, because it's hard to anticipate every circumstance that comes before a new code. But in terms of your instance or others that might be doing remodeling projects, really those types of things are governed underneath the property maintenance and property building standards, which are adopted by the state. So those types of things are untouched. It's more or less new construction. So you're going to build a new home, or if you're going to add a driveway apron to your property, those types of things. We prescribe where and how and where those things can occur. One of the things we're going to continue to press upon is the zoning code of past had required paved surfaces for driveways. And I know a lot of people contact us about the sinkholes and the gravel that's all over the road. I know it's a public works or streets issue, but we're going to continue to pursue the paved surfaces and driveways, that people cannot be parking on unpaved surfaces. They can't be parking on the front lawn. That's more of a property maintenance code, less a zoning code issue. But those are kind of connected. They play together. So in terms of, if somebody, the average homeowner isn't going to be dramatically affected, and I would even say they won't be affected until they want to do a big addition on their home or something else.
Okay. How will this also affect one of the issues that can be rather contentious in a city is when you come in and say, we need to put some sidewalks in here for the safety, for instance, of school kids.
Yeah.
And how will this zoning, will this make it easier to get that in, or how will that?
Well, it'll require it with new developments. So to the extent that there was maybe discretion granted in the past, I hope that doesn't occur as much as it did then, as it will in the future. That's the standard of development, is if you're going to put in a single-family home or a commercial development along a street, the sidewalks are required, have been required, but there have been times where exceptions were made. And sometimes for reasons that were probably valid and important at the time. But when you build a community over the course of 100 and some years, these types of amenities are some that people come to expect.
Now, with that, is this updated code? Is this available online? Or
yes, yeah, it's available on the city's website if you type in zoning code. There's also a website that actually has the progress meeting minutes and everything, you can link to it from the city's community development page. So if you go to community development and click zoning code, you'll see it.
Got to take one more break, and then we'll be back with more here on The Morning Magazine. Sunny and 74 at AM 1320. Welcome back to The Morning Magazine, our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. The phone lines are open at 715-424-2600. If you want to talk to your mayor, and please, over the back fence callers, please wait for your turn. But we'll get to this caller, and then I have a question with some other things to talk about. But let's get this caller on the air. You're on The Morning Magazine.
Good morning, Carl and Mayor. First of all, I'm so happy to see the Grimlers is returning.
We are too. That's pretty exciting.
The bakery, I think that's a plus for the west side and all over.
Definitely.
And then, excuse me, I was wondering about the buildings where the bookstore was and the archery. I believe it used to be on West Grand.
Mm-hmm.
Is that public property, or is that just closed up?
So it is private property, and there was a building maintenance issue with the front of the former church's drugstore and archery shop, where the facade is.
I was wondering, I see some work being done there. I didn't know if they were going to be remodeling those areas, or.
No, there are no plans to remodel. It's my understanding that they will be demolished at some point in the future. There was an issue with the front of the church's drugstore where it's coming away from the building and presents a safety hazard for people.
I see, because I know that block, I think, doesn't that entail, excuse me, the Cultural Arts Center?
Right, and all of those properties are owned by the Meadwitter Foundation.
Oh, the entire block, okay.
Well, not the entire block, but the corner of the block, so the Cultural Center, bookstore, and archery.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the call.
Okay, bye-bye. And let's get into something graduated or bonding. Okay, what are we talking about?
So there was an issue brought before the council related to the possession of drug paraphernalia,
right?
Where they adjusted the bond schedule for that possession offenses, and so the council did pass that last night. For subsequent offenses, after the first, that there would be higher fines, I guess I would call it. The challenge I see is, having been informed on this issue now for a period of time, I don't believe that the actions by the council will make any impact on the activities that are happening in our community and communities around the country.
But they haven't.
If you increase the fine for somebody that's engaged in an addictive behavior that doesn't necessarily have the means to get help or is being treated, hitting them with another fine or an increased fine isn't going to make it any different. And in fact, I think I support Alderperson Catnaw's dissent on this, and that's it's going to create more difficult situations for people that are struggling with addiction or trying to get help. And so by tacking on another larger fine for them is going to create more of a burden for our police department with larger warrants. Our jail is going to have more people in it for longer periods of time because they can't pay their fine. So it's going to compound the issue. And I don't know.
But they can say, "Oh, we've got tough on drugs."
Yeah, and it's paraphernalia, right? It's purely drug paraphernalia. It's not even the possession of drugs. So if you've got some paraphernalia in your possession, that's what this pertains to. I don't know if I disagree with it strongly enough to issue a veto, but certainly I am considering input from the community about the matter. I know folks in the public health arena have reached out and said, we want to weigh in. This is an issue that we all agree needs to be solved, but you don't solve it necessarily by tacking on a larger fine for somebody that's possessing paraphernalia. And it doesn't get anybody the help that they need. But again, I tend to agree with your position. It sends a message, oh, we're tough on drugs, but
doesn't do anything.
There's nothing behind it. It's all smoke and mirrors. So that was an issue that was approved by the council last night. And I think actually one of the comments from the council members that actually many communities have gone the opposite direction and decriminalized some of the activities. So there are obviously schools of thought on this. The research shows that this doesn't improve outcomes. It doesn't move the needle for dealing with drug issues.
Well, I've had folks from the drug court here who said that.
Right.
I've had judges who said that.
Yep.
Why aren't we listening to the people who deal with these kind of issues on a regular basis? and getting their expertise.
I hope that the council, as it goes forward and discusses issues such as this or others, that they invite informed and educated opinions. There wasn't a single opinion solicited, as far as I'm aware, on these topics. The council sat around a table at a committee of the whole and discussed how they felt about it and their perceptions and their life experiences, but there wasn't any educated, I'm not saying these individuals are uneducated, but there wasn't any real informed individual that professionally deals with the situation.
Yeah, I would think you would want to do that. Okay, we got to get this caller in. Thank you for waiting, and you're on the air with Mayor Vruwink.
Thank you for taking my call. I got two questions. One pertains to the west side, and I'm strictly speaking of how come, am I right, the council turned that deal down on an apartment home over on Rosecrans and 17th?
We just talked about that, sir.
I heard only a portion of it.
Okay.
I didn't know the house late.
Okay.
So the first point on that is, frankly, I think each of the alderpersons owe you and the residents of the community their explanation. There hadn't been much discussion at all on this issue. Some blamed safety, some blamed traffic, some blamed a number of issues. I don't believe there was a legal reason that the city stood on there to turn that down. It's frustrating for me because we work hard every day to bring development and developers to the city.
Right, and it's nothing but a swamp.
That's right.
I know. I was kind of raised over there from 1941 until 50. And now the second question would be, why in the world and who from the city authorized that St. Luke's would have to replace the sidewalk? There's nothing wrong with that sidewalk.
It's a good question. I believe the city concrete inspector would make that call.
You better go back and look again.
Okay.
The church has plenty to upright. They're always handing out free meals and etc. And I know Carl could.
Yeah, I go to that's my church.
So St. Luke's. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what's the problem. I've walked that sidewalk. I haven't had any problems.
So it's for replacement.
Like a lot of properties in the city itself where sidewalks should be replaced.
Sure.
I know they're getting at them slow but sure, but mostly slow. Okay, so I'll let you both go, and I thank you.
Thanks
You're
for the
welcome.
call.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised about that. I don't.
I'm actually not aware of that issue. Did you hear from?
No, I haven't heard. That's the first time I heard.
I know that they were putting sidewalks in over near St. Luke's.
That could be like a new sidewalk.
Right, that's what I'm thinking. It was new sidewalk.
Okay, because let's talk before we wrap up the show. Another big 4th of July, and there was a new ceremony, and that leads me to believe maybe we need a flagpole on the east side at Veterans Memorial Park. But
there is one actually. It's just so crowded by trees.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that. The ceremony that you had prior to the fireworks on the east side.
Well, we had a very special and probably a once in a period of time anyway opportunity to have the 115th Fighter Wing from Madison do a flyover.
How did that happen?
So they contacted us a couple of months ago about potentially coordinating something on the 4th, and we struggled because we don't have much of a celebration downtown or in the city on the 4th of July, which hint, I think there may be an opportunity for somebody to pursue that. I know the aqua skiers do a nice event to raise funds for their cause and their effort, but there hasn't really been any tweaks or additions to that for a long time. So we said, what if we hold another small event near the start of the show, the fireworks show, at the last possible time that we can get an actual flyover to occur. So we had 2 F-16s surprise the crowd at about 8 o'clock, just after 8 o'clock. They had started their run in Racine at about 7:30, and then made it to central Wisconsin at 8 o'clock, and came through here at about 8 minutes after 8 is what they timed for us. So we coordinated the singing of the national anthem. If people haven't seen the video, get on Facebook to see
I saw
it.
the video of it. It's very cool.
It is incredibly neat, and I think we'll have to have community access. I'm not sure if they're running that on TV, but I think it's a really cool experience for people to see, the celebration of our country's independence, but obviously acknowledging those that serve our country or have served our country.
We're going to bring back something that we had for a little bit and lost, and it's part of our culture here. A lot of people don't realize the person that created Betty Boop, the famous cartoon character, and if you've been to the Southwood County Historical Museum, you've seen that room, that artist from our area, from here, and we're going to have a Betty Boop Festival.
Coming back on August 11th, the Chamber of Commerce is coordinating another Betty Boop Festival. I know it had been here for a while, came and went, and now came again. So, very excited.
Well, let's go. Just hopefully this caller is wanting to talk to you, Your Honor, and not trying to get on over the back fence. Okay, you're on the Morning Magazine with Mayor Vruwink. Real quick.
Wait, this isn't over the back fence?
No.
I'm just kidding. It's been a good show. It's good listening to you guys, you and the mayor. And just had a question about, you were talking about the flagpole. Do you have any comments on putting a light on the one in Veterans Park? And also, why would you put underground parking in a flood zone? Just a comment. I'll tune my radio up and hang up.
Sure.
Thank you.
So I'm actually surprised at the flagpole to hear that the flagpole in Veterans is not lit. So I can look at that. Have water. In
I've had multiple complaints.
Sure.
About
I know it's pretty crowded by trees, but I believe that there is enough power supply in that vicinity to accomplish that. The second point about underground parking. So I'm assuming it relates to the senior housing development, but I'll comment in both instances where it's being considered. The senior housing project, they actually came in and did their geotechnical analysis where they did soil borings in that site. They believe that the project in the site still can bear underground parking. That property is entirely funded by the private sector. There is no city involvement in the underground parking portion, so I'd quickly say quip and say that it's probably not our problem. But they believe that the underground parking can be borne in that area. There is probably a significant amount of bedrock in that area, as is in much cases on the west side, as we found out with the West Side Lift Station project, where we had to pause and now do a lot of removal for bedrock. As it relates to the east side of the river, we did do soil borings there as well. We know that there's a water table concern, but I would say in the similar case as the west side project, these developers experience that. It doesn't scare them, one with the bedrock, nor with a water table or a dewatering issue. So I would vouch that they have the qualifications, and they certainly have to meet the code to construct that to standard and operate it safely and efficiently.
But there are people say you can do it. I guess it's their money. Now, the project on the trail, any update on the, we all go by and we see all the work that's going on. How is it going so far?
So we believe Demitz Park will be wrapped up in a couple of weeks. The trail along 3rd Street went really well. We were able to accommodate some design modifications last minute to save some trees that were very important to neighboring property owners. Now, they were city trees, but we were able to make some modifications and consideration to save those trees, so I think that was a win for everyone. We actually ran into a sewer issue under the bridge where we ran the trail. So if people drive down Riverwood Lane, they'll see there's a small section of sidewalk not completed. Well, there's a sanitary sewer that's taking in water, so we've got to repair that before we actually, it's kind of a sinkhole situation, and then we'll come through and pave the sidewalk. So Demitz Park, we believe it will be wrapped up in the next couple of weeks. The contractors are now, when they wrap that up, will be moving upriver, toward downtown, and so the trail will continue down there, as well as the regrading and riverbank stabilization. So Demitz is pretty well wrapped up as far as riverbank stabilization, any of the major grading projects.
Okay, so how much will they be able to get done before snow flies?
Well, they should be able to wrap up everything by this time snow flies, and hopefully we've got a long construction season ahead yet, because a lot of projects are still in the works, not to mention the housing projects we've talked about, as well as city projects.
Anything new on the triangle? Or?
Yeah, we still are waiting for the developer to come back with a proposal to the city. As soon as we receive that, we're going to react to it and move forward.
Okay. Well, it's been an interesting morning, and I thank you for your time, sir. And we'll do it again next month. And we thank our callers for their participation as well during this radio listening session with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Carl, and thanks to our listeners.
And that's going to wrap up this edition of the Morning Magazine on AM 1320 and WFHR.com, as well as on Wisconsin Rapids Community Media.